In this age of new normal, online is not your only option. Because new normal means new learning modalities and new learning possibilities. Let Vibal make learning offline possible with Smart Class. Smart Class contains pre-made daily modules sequenced according to DepEd's budgeted teaching and learning calendar. Each module has a specific lesson duration and has day markers to guide parents and teachers in the asynchronous learning of learners. Inside the modules available in Smart Class, you will find the following elements. First, learning competencies are identified in the module openers. Kickstarters are available to test students' prior knowledge on the subject matter. This set of activities, found at the beginning of each lesson, may also serve as motivational activities. Parents of preschool to grade 2 students will also find notes to parents which contain tips and pointers on how they can guide their child while learning at home. Redefine your students' learning experience with the integration of augmented reality technology into images and illustrations available in Smart Class, making learning more interactive and exciting. At the end of each module, Long Quiz is also available to assess students' understanding of the lesson. Smart Class also features Wrap Up, a lesson ender activity that applies the constructivism theory of learning. In Wrap Up, students are expected to summarize the lesson on their own using a graphic organizer. You may also evaluate the quality of your students' learning by letting them practice their learning in real life through GRASP's formatted performance tasks. The content of Smart Class is designed for the entire academic year, and it is available for 5 major subjects. All aligned with DepEd's K-12 curriculum and covers the most essential learning competencies prescribed by DepEd. Secure your own copy of Smart Class before classes open. Contact marketing@dibalgroup.com to know more.
Good day, Kabibal, and welcome to our Philippine Professional Standard for Teachers Domain 1 Content, Knowledge, and Pedagogy webinar series. For the discussion this afternoon, our topic will be Mother Tongue, Filipino, and English in Teaching and Learning. Before we begin, take note of the following reminders. Make sure you're registered to the webinar to have your e-certificate of participation. Visit certificate.bibalgroup.com to generate your proof of attendance. Place your questions in the comment box allotted during the session and they will be addressed by a speaker later on. Share the video using hashtag LearnAs1PH as our official hashtag to our Bibal webinars. Experience learning, Kabibal. And now to proceed with our webinar this afternoon, it is my pleasure to introduce to you our distinguished speaker for today. Brother Roderick M. Aguirre is a consultant evaluator of K-12 Philippine Basic Education Curriculum and academic consultant for Sister of Mary's Philippines. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Brother Roderick M. Aguirre.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is one of the many problems yet again. I've been talking right after Michelle introduced me. I immediately started talking again and then realized I have forgotten to unmute my microphone and to switch on my camera. Okay, so again, we're here, a continuation of the PTSD Domain 1, which is on the content knowledge and pedagogy. And my hair is getting longer because I'm working from home, and it doesn't matter for as long as we're able to deliver what we are supposed to deliver to our students and inspire them to be the best that they can be every day that we have sessions with them. So for this afternoon, we will focus more on strand 6 of domain 1, which is on the role of the language as MOTL. Used to be, we call it as MOI, or the medium of instruction, but due to a change of nomenclature in the onset of the K-12 curriculum, we changed that to MOTL, which stands for a medium of teaching and learning. Used to be medium of instruction, but we changed that to both to two perspectives, the teaching and the learning. All right. And we're going to discuss those principles, why we have to consider mother tongue, Filipino and English, as the MOTL of our students, and how we can help our students be able to transcend their skills from mother tongue to Filipino to English. But we're not going to make this a long topic though, because this is just going to be an hour ride with me as we understand the role of language in the teaching and learning process. So let me share with you, before I share with you my PowerPoint with you, would like to make a shout out to all the teachers of the Sisters of Mary who are tuning in right now, especially the teachers from Girls Town in Bigat too, the teachers of Adlas, Sisters of Mary Adlas, the Boys Town, and of course our teachers in Cebu, the Talisay, Girls Town Talisay, and the Boys Town Manila. Good afternoon, and of course all teachers are tuning in right now. Teachers from Benedictine Institute of Learning, from Aquinas, and all other private schools to the public schools. Welcome and good afternoon, and I assure you that you will get some information as takeaways from this session this afternoon. And now, since I've already given my shout out, let me share with you my PowerPoint presentation. All right, there we go. Our indicator for teachers for PPSC Domain 1 would be the mastery level, which says that for teachers to say that they have reached mastery level on Strand 6 and the PST Domain 1, they must be able to show exemplary skills in advocate the use of mother tongue, Filipino and English, in teaching and learning to facilitate the learner's language, cognitive and academic development, and to foster pride of their language, heritage, and culture. Wow, that's too much to take in. But it basically boils down to the idea that language should not be a barrier to the teaching and learning. If our students are still struggling with the target language of the MOTL, say English, as used as the MOTL for science and mathematics, and if we see their facial expressions and their body language showing that they still are having difficulty understanding the concepts of the content of their content due to the barrier of the language of the content, then it's very important for us as teachers to use a language, an auxiliary language that will support our students' learning. Because at the end of the day, what's important is that our students understood. Wait lang naano ko sa buhok ko talaga kung may gumagana, may sariling sumpa eh. All right, at the end of the day, I was so conscious about the hair anyway. At the end of the day, what's important is that our students understood the lesson. They may still be struggling with the target language like English in mathematics and science, but if they already understood the concept, then we have already helped them meet halfway the demands of the subject area. All right, let us be reminded that when we are teaching a subject area, it's always a dual role, a dual responsibility to help our students to understand the language of the content and the content of the subject matter. Because again, if our students do not understand the language of the content, do you think they will understand the content that you are hoping that your students will learn? Definitely not. Okay, so most of the problems of our students out there is not the content per se, or the concept that they're supposed to understand the subject area. It's because they lack the skills, the proficiency of the MOTL, or the medium of teaching and learning. First slide pa lang, ang dami ko ng daldal. So this will be our outline for today, this quite short way of presenting my topic. I will have a trivia that's related to the role of language in the teaching and learning process, and then I will have a self-awareness, just 2 slides for us to be aware of. Are we really aware of the importance of the language when we teach our students our subject matter, or we just need to finish the subject matter? And no matter how we see that our students are struggling so much in understanding the concepts, we just have to finish it. I mean, these are just things that we need to be aware of as an educator. And then we'll have a little bit of discussion on what are the roles of the mother tongue, Filipino English, in K-12 curriculum, and on their several functions in the medium of instruction and in gaining confidence, okay, self-confidence, and also gaining self-identity, not just learning a new language, and learning a new subject matter, but also understanding that language and culture are rooted together. That once we learn a language, we also, one way or the other, learn the culture of where the origin of that language come from. And then next we'll have open forum. So if you have questions and you have comments, do not hesitate to key in your questions and clarifications on the comment box below. And of course, I'll post a little bit of some challenges for you teachers out there. So let's begin. So our trivia would focus on the language and acquisition learning. These are supposedly common information that people should take. This is common information. So it's common information. We know that everyone should know about this and should well, basically would say, I know that already and brush that off their shoulders. And they've been doing that for quite some time. But it's a trivia that all teachers should know, and even for parents, because a lot of parents out there and even teachers believe that if a student is good in English, automatically the student is cognitively and academically advanced. That's non sequitur, or that's a Latin word for does not follow. Okay, because if that's true, then all all English speakers are all cognitively and academically advanced. But research found out that even speakers of the language, the first language, the speakers of that language as their first language, still also struggle in learning the concepts in the target content area. It's because language need to be explicitly taught to our students in the sense that language facilitate literacy and numeracy. And if we are not able to facilitate the bridging of the gap between what the language stands for and its role in the understanding of the content, that's our role, to bridge that gap, okay? To make the language of the subject comprehensible to our students. Let's start with this trivia, this common knowledge that communications comes first, not grammar. I know that a lot of teachers gone through in the educational system in the Philippines that what's important is that we sound right, pronunciation, we sound right, um, we are grammatical, and so on and so forth, to the point that meaning is set aside. All right, because a lot of people out there who sound great, who are grammatical, but they are nonsensical. There are a lot of people out there as well who graduated from basic education that may have problems using the English language or Filipino language, but they have good ideas. Only that in the Philippines, well, not just the Philippines per se, but mostly some countries who believe that English is the predominant language of intelligence and the predominant language of, would say, academic excellence. A lot of people would say those who cannot communicate their ideas well in English are those who are not really that good. But again, it's just the language, because there's a possibility that this person is really intelligent, is that he was not given an opportunity to learn at the mastery level this target language. And therefore, it does not discount what he knows and what he understands. On that note, there's a possibility that we could also use other languages of comfortability, like the language of the student. Posible kasi matalino ang bata, pero dahil nga hindi niya natutunan ang English siguro sa elementary kasi sa daming classmates, hindi sila natutukan ng teacher nila, hindi niya ma-express ang ideas at sa kanyang thoughts at saka comprehension niya sa English. But probably magaling siya na-express niya sa mother tongue. So on that note, the child has language problems, all right, or needs language instruction, but has no problem with academics and no problems with comprehension and understanding. Nakukuha pa ba natin yun? So this is what communication means. That our students may not be really, really that proficient in the language, but if we look into their thoughts and ideas and feelings, and that there is that meaning that they would like to convey, we have to believe that we need to provide them with language instruction to facilitate the use of the language as an MOTL. But then again, there's a possibility that we use Filipino or mother tongue to help students learn the target language. Nakuha po natin, paano nga naman ang bata makaintindi ng English, makapagsalita sa English, kung si teacher English ng English, tapos ang mga bata hindi pa nga nakaintindi ng listening sa English. Tinuturuan ng teacher magbasa sa English, hindi pa marunong ang bata umintindi sa pakikinig at saka sa pagsasalita sa English o kay sa Filipino. So, one step at a time. Next trivia. Vocabulary grows via frequent use of common expression, not by rote memory. A lot of research shows that people or our students or individuals get to be immersed into the language if they are given ample opportunity to use the language. Alas, this is one of the many problems in the Philippine educational system. Like if we want our students to be uh, co- communicable, this is yun eh. They are good conversant, to become conversant in the English language or Filipino. There must be a situation or ample situation, not just inside the classroom, but also at homes to the use of this language. Now, before the pandemic, our students were able to use English at school with the help of the teacher as a facilitator and a way of coming up with activities that allow students to use the English language or the Filipino language, helping students to transition their mother tongue skills to Filipino and English. Now, at home, this could be now a challenge at home. Would are the families, are the members of the families, the parents, the primary caregivers also know that they have to use the MOTL at home so that students will be, you know, gradually introduced, gradually acquire and learn the use of this language in the different subject area. Kasi posible sa bahay, ang ginagawa ng mga magulang ay para maintindihan ng bata, nagba-mother tongue. That's not wrong. That is good for comprehension and for understanding of the lesson. But then again, we have to tell the parents that, ma'am, okay po, na-explain niyo po sa mother tongue sa Filipino. This time, paki-transition po sa English or sa MOTL. Medium instruction is that, oh, na-explain nga ni nanay, naintindihan ng bata, pero pagdating ng assessment po, kung hindi mother tongue MOTL, magsasuffer ang bata sa assessment. This is what we call as a duality of the MOTL. Duality in a sense that the words and the language that our students are exposed to in oral form are also the kind of language that will be used in the assessment. Kung sa bahay, hindi sinani ng mga magulang ang paggamit ng MOTL ng subject area because, of course, hindi naman alam ng mga magulang ang principles ng MOTL, then magkakaroon po, I assure you, magkakaroon po talaga ng mababang score sa mga bata. Not because they did not learn anything from the subject. It's probably they just don't understand the language of the assessment because it was not the language of conversation and the language of learning, teaching, learning at home. So you teachers and parents out there, it is very important for us to know the principle of the duality and consistency of the MOTL of instruction and learning. Okay, and assessment. Third and last trivia that I would like you to focus on would be pronunciation develops with constant listening, reading, and communicating. So if we keep on telling our students that they have problems with pronunciation, now it's not their fault. They have been exposed to people who have been pronouncing it that way, that way. On that note, it is very important for adults and for teachers and even for parents to understand that the oral language, the oral form of the language, be it mother tongue, Filipino, and English, is modeled to our students. Halimbawa, may bata nagsabi nga, ganito magsalita, parang papunta kami doon kasi mayroong kasi bibili po kami ng pitong egg waffle. Oh wow. Quack quack pa. Quack quack pala yun, yung quack quack. Why do they speak that way? There's a possibility that they have been exposed to the kind of language and the way they use Filipino, and it's not their fault. It was that's how they learned the language in the oral form because that's how they were exposed to it. So kung gusto mo mong okay ang kanilang Filipino, then dapat ganon din po ang exposure ng mga adults sa kanila. If ganon din po ang gusto nyong exposure, tamang pronunciation, tamang accentuation, tamang communication using the language, English, mother tongue Filipino, then dapat ang adults maayos ang pagkakagamit ng wika na to. Dahil nga, modeled yan. Walang batang pinapanganak na merong wika na. Kung meron po, hindi ko po alam. Kahit nga si Jesus po, nang pinanganak po, had to learn the language of the humanity. Although, siguro God nga siya can learn any language. But then again, he had to adjust the language of the community. So at that time, I think was, I forgot kung anong, mas may old language din sila nun. So let's not talk about that. And I'm not yet well versed with the old language in the Bible. All right, so let's proceed now to our discussion. So yun lang mga dapat tanungin natin sa sarili natin. Am I so strict with the use of the MOTL? Kasi may mga bata na sumasagot sa akin ng mother tongue nila or Filipino nila. Naintindihan ko na, naintindihan nila. Pero may problema sila kasi English ang subject namin. O, tanong natin, anong problema ng bata? Diba? It's a problem of the language. So ano pa dapat ibigay natin sa bata? Language instruction. Naintindihan naman niya yung lesson. Okay? Paano kung hindi naintindihan ng bata? Sir, hindi po niya naintindihan kasi especially sa mathematics, that means the child has not understood the content because hindi niya naintindihan ang language. All right. So look at this. Let's have an awareness. Look at this. Do you understand? Yes, I know it's a letter because of its format. The question is, do you understand what's inside it? Sir, naturalmente, hindi namin maintindihan yan dahil hindi namin alam hindi namin alam ang wika. Exactly my point. This is the self-awareness I would like you to realize. Will students learn the content of math? Will the students learn the content of literature? Will students learn the content of science and TLE if they do not understand the language? Or if the language is not comprehensible to them? Ganun lang po kadali po yun. Most of our students struggle in learning the subject matter. It's not necessarily the content per se. Content will always be content, right? Especially for math and science, it's exact. There's no discussions of opinion. When you solve it, it's basically that procedure. But what's problematic in this subject area is that students have problem with the language of the subject matter. Kaya nga po, this is what this domain and this trend is trying to tell us, teachers. We need to realize that when we teach the subject, it's also teaching the language of the subject, not just the subject per se. And on that note, we have this principle that all teachers are language teachers. Hindi lang Filipino teachers, hindi lang po ang science teachers, Filipino and English teachers or mother tongue teachers, but all teachers teaching a subject matter which utilizes a certain MOTL or medium teaching and learning should also teach the language of the subject matter. All right, another one, I'll give you an example here. I know, sir, it's determined maximum altitude. So may mga ganun po, parang hindi ko maintindihan kung anong ibig sabihin niya, anong ibig sabihin ng H, anong ibig sabihin ng L. But a lot of people would understand this if they know the mathematical language. So wag mong sabihin na, hindi mo naintindihan. No, I will understand this if I know the language. Diba? Give me how to interpret the language. Give me what is the language used here, how to interpret that. Because I cannot go to understanding, I cannot go to interpretation and analysis if I do not know the language used here. Sir, mga numbers, I know, but it stands for something. Right. So ang tawag po dito is that for anyone to, there's something wrong with my lalag siya. For anyone to understand the content of this material, she needs to know the mathematical language used here. Dito lang po sa sabihin po sa inyo what the strand is all about. That we have to teach both the language and the content of the subject matter. And we need to realize that there's a huge possibility that our students may understand the language and the content through reading, through listening, but may also have problems expressing because probably the oral language still lacking. Okay? So may mga levels kasi ang language. Meron tayo listening, speaking, reading, and writing. Maaaring ang bata sa receptive language, like listening and reading, they can understand. But they have problems with expressive language, expressive use of the language, that's speaking and writing. So, paano mangyayari na ang bata pakapag-speak? Then we have to teach our students how to use the language. And we model how the oral language of the MOTL is used in the subject matter. Same with writing. All right, so let's now go to discussion and understand all of this self-awareness activity by answering the following questions. I just prepared 3 questions and we're going to start with what is MTD-MLE, and for once that is understand its role in the K-12 curriculum, and on the question that can teachers code switch inside the classroom so that we can facilitate understanding of the content and then help students transition their MT or Filipino to the MOTL. And this is what we would like to understand. Meron bang provision na okay lang po kami na hindi, okay po ako sir mag-resort to mother tongue or Filipino. Halimbawa, mga Cebuano, pag nasa mathematics, could we explain, nakita na namin sa mga mukha ng mga bata, hindi maintindihan, could we use the mother tongue Cebuano to facilitate comprehension on the idea that the students still have problems understanding receptively in the target MOL. That will be English kung sa high school po yan. Okay, kung ganun po, you'll have to provide feedback to the English teachers or perhaps to the whole school na kailangan magbigay ng programa sa mga estudyanteng ito na students who are they are understanding the content using the mother tongue pero they struggle in the MOTL. So, ibig sabihin, kahit pa anong promotion natin sa mga bata, kung hindi natin natulungan ang bata na ang problema pala nila ay hindi subject matter, kung hindi language of the subject matter. Tapos sasabihin ng mga teachers, sisihin natin ang English teacher at Filipino. Pagdating sa high school po, the English language becomes not just a language but also a subject, specifically zoning on understanding and comprehending via the literature. It becomes a subject matter in itself. Sa elementary, pwede pa siguro na talagang facilitating the learning of the language for it to be for students to acquire literacy and or say literacy the target language for them to function in the subject area. Pagdating sa high school, hindi na. So do not blame the language teachers for students' inadequacy in the use of the language in the subject matter. So here's our answer. So it starts with, there's a premise that for our students to transcend from listening to speaking to reading and writing, it has to start with meaning. Students need to understand that language is used to exchange messages, exchange ideas. They need to understand na pag nagsalita si teacher, mayroong meaning yan, may sinasabi siya. At dapat, kung may sinasabi siya, kasi si teacher, sa oras na kasi listening and speaking, pag nakita niya si teacher ng sasalita niya, dapat nakikinig na ako. Dapat there's what we call as role exchange of roles. When someone is speaking, someone has to listen. When the roles are exchanged, I am now the one speaking, the teacher will now have to listen. Yan po ang sinasabi po natin na or there is someone talking and someone listening, and roles will change as the process evolves in the teaching and learning process. But things that students should be aware of and teachers should emphasize when they talk, so that students can listen well to the information, they need to emphasize not sounds. Okay, so teachers, it's not really that important that you sound like native speakers of the English language or native speakers of Filipino, talagang para kang Tagalog magsalita. No, it's more of students being able to hear that there are many words, that they can distinguish words in your utterances. Okay, marami kasi ako na di ko alam kung comprehensible pong aking enunciation and pronunciation with you, but this has always been my accent. I don't know, probably na umarte pa habang tumatagal at tumatanda. But the point is, I try my best that people understand me. And the pacing and the speed when we explain things must be comprehensible to our students, not just the sound, not just the pronunciation per se, but also that it's comprehensible in the speed. Minsan kasi when teachers are excited of the topic that they're discussing, they tend to forget. I personally also tend to forget that, hey, I am talking here not for myself, but for my students. And if my students are still learning pacing with the language, then I have to slow down. Kagaya po sa Filipino, isa po yan sa isang wika na medyo nahirapan pa rin po hanggang ngayon at my age po. Hindi ko sinasabi na matanda. Sinasabi ko lang po at my age na still learning in the process. I still ask, could you please slow down a little, because there are some words in Filipino that I have difficulty understanding, especially pag ang haba-haba na, hindi ko na siya mag-grasp sa utak ko. Kasi ang Filipino may mga salita sobrang habang-haba, parang walang katapusan ata. The point there is that just because I'm good in English and I can understand lots of information in English does not necessarily mean I will be good in another language. I still need instruction in Filipino for me to understand materials written or subjects delivered in the subject area. It's non-sequitur again, na pag magaling ka sa isang wika, gagaling ka sa lahat. But it can facilitate the learning and you becoming better at transferring your skills in L1 to L2. Pako natin. All right, good. So phonological awareness. Next, phonemic awareness is very important as well, that we are able to distinguish initial sounds and final sounds, that there's a change of the initial sound, a change of final sounds, there will also be a change of meaning. What's important here is students understand that when they play with sounds and change the sounds to the word, meaning changes as well. Vocabulary is very important as well, so that they will be able to express, because of course they need to understand the meaning of this of the words. Of course, next would be language comprehension, like syntax level, semantic level, and so on and so forth. Words that pertain to something else, denotation and connotation. So how the language is exposed to our students will be the how they are going to use the language in oral form. So kung ang mga bata may mali, halimbawa, pasensya po sa mga taga Bisaya, ako po, Bisaya din po. Waray-waray po, to be specific. Bakit pira? Ang pera naging tira. Well, because they have been exposed to that, it becomes an allophone. Ibig sabihin, para sa pandinig nila, wala nang pinagkaiba ang pera sa pira. Only the Filipinos who are, very sensitive to the sounds of this language will be able to distinguish. Well, for some people who have already been using the language, will be sensitive enough to hear the differences. But for those naging allophone na po siya, they will not. Anong problema? Mali ba siya? Mali ba ang meaning niya? Kasi wala akong pira para pangsakay dyan sa jeep. The question is, may mga tao sasabi, ano ba yan, Bisaya? Wait, anong problema doon sa pronunciation niya? Tama ba ang kanyang sinabi? Tama ba ang meaning? Opo, tama naman po. O di anong problema natin? Sa pronunciation, hindi naman siya Tagalog. So anong problema natin? A lot of people, because we're not sensitive of the language system of people in the Philippines, they tend to generalize, and they have this xenophobic idea that the language is better than the other languages in the Philippines, just because Tagalog seems to be at the forefront of literary pieces, literary genre in the Philippines, does not make it the best language or the number one language in the Philippines. Hindi naman. Kung titingnan po natin ang number of speakers, mas marami pong ang Cebuano or Bisaya speakers of the language. Therefore, kung titingnan po natin sa linguistic perspective, dapat ang mas language of influence and language of commonality of people speaking it, the number of speakers, di ano po, Bisaya, almost Mindanao, Bisaya sa Mindanao, marunong mag-Bisaya. At ngayon sa Maynila, sa Luzon, they are now being introduced to the Bisaya because of the songs and the radios. Yun lang sinasabi po natin, okay? That let us not be so hasty in judging people just because they sound different from ours. What's important is that, okay, you sound different, but tama ba ang sinabi mo? Tama ba ang meaning mo? Let's focus on meaning. What we're trying to introduce in this MOTL, this idea of language, is that let us not focus so much on the differences of nuances of the language. If meaning is conveyed, good, naintindihan ng bata, let's take note of the different nuances. As for specific instruction, siguro kailangan ko sabihin ng Filipino teacher to focus more on the vowel sounds sa patinig para matutunan ng bata. Pero hindi ko siya sasabihin na mali ang kanyang idea dahil mali ang pronunciation. Just because mali ang pronunciation, pero tama naman ang meaning, hindi ibig sabihin mali ang bata. Tama naman ang kanyang explanation, just because hindi niya na-explain sa English na dapat English, hindi na niya naintindihan. Okay? May problema lang ang bata sa expressing his ideas or her ideas in English, but not necessarily wala siyang naintindihan. Okay? Hindi magkapareho yun. Nancy Catur. Just because hindi alam hindi niya masagamit ang language, doesn't mean hindi niya naintindihan, hindi niya nagsasabay. Hindi po complete. Sasabi lang po. Alright. Next would be the transitioning of ORCID to literacy in the K-12 curriculum. We're trying to see that in the mother tongue or in Filipino or in English is that once our students have ample exposure, ample proficiency in the oral language, like speaking and writing, and its uses in interactions with other people, it's now easy for teachers and for students to transfer these skills and their knowledge to literacy. Why? Because the basics of ORC, phonologic awareness, phonemic awareness, and vocabulary and language comprehension are also one of those foundations for students to be able to transition their oral skills to print codes. So halos ang basic po na elements ng oracy is similar to literacy. Although may mga changes, may differences kasi papasok ko yung orthographia or orthography ng language here. Nonetheless, mas madali na po maintindihan ng mga bata kasi meron na siyang ample recognition of how sounds is represented in print, how words, oral words are represented in print. So on that note, students facilitate learning in the subject matter in literacy, in reading and writing, because they have been exposed to the use of the target MOTL. Also, oracy is also transitioned to literacy from oracy and reading because the elements needed for students to be able to write and represent also the basic foundations would be the same as the basic foundations for oracy and reading. Kaya lang po ang problema ay dapat in one language yan. Ang tawag po natin yan, consistency. What happened is that hindi natin alam kung was there consistency of transitioning of oracy to reading to writing in mother tongue? Kung doon pa lang hindi na-facilitate ang kanyang transitioning, do you expect students to holistically transfer all? Kasi lacking na nga siya sa skills doon eh. Pagdating pa sa mother tongue, as a Filipino, doon pa tuturo pa yung differences of the language at then pupunta sa English. So maraming sa utak ng bata, naguguluhan siya. Yung away naging away. Diba? Away, away. So, hit ng bata, di ko na maintindihan dahil hindi tinuro ng teacher ang differences ng sound system ng English and Filipino. The point here, ladies and gentlemen, is that exposure to the language, once students have ample proficiency in the L1, that could be mother tongue, it could be Tagalog, or any mother tongues in the Philippines, it will be easy for students to learn other subject matter, the language of the subject matter. Kasi, bakit? Nakaintindi sila. They have what we call as the literacy skills, the numeracy skills. Okay? To summarize that, once our students have facilitated, acquired proficient level in language, literacy, and numeracy development in the mother tongue, it will be easy for them to transition the skills to the language. So same skills naman, same set skills ang ita-transfer niya, only that kailangan niyang matutunan lang ng target language at to be Filipino. All right? And once students have already learned proficiency in the mother tongue and then Filipino, madali lang i-transfer ang mga skills na yon in the English language. Only that they will focus more on comprehending the language or decoding the language. Kaya tinawag siyang mother tongue based dahil ang pagkatuto ng ibang wika na ginagamit as medium instruction sa other subject area emanates and is rooted and grounded on their proficiency at acquiring numeracy and literacy and scientific skills in the mother tongue. Kaya lang dapat matagal yan eh kasi hindi yan isang grade level lang matutunan ng bata. Kaya nga sa K-12 curriculum hanggang grade 6 pinapagamit ang mother tongue as primary fundamental language and also as auxiliary language. Ibig sabihin support to the learning of other languages. Okay, hindi iniiwan agad ang mother tongue. Kundi continuous siyang tinuturuan ng bata para ma-continue niya ang kanyang pagkatuto ng mga skills. Kasi nga skills are the same. Anong babaguhin lang ng bata? Kung matuto ang bata maggawa ng scientific experiments in mother tongue, are these the same skills taught in science na English ang ginagamit? Yeah, same skills. Ano lang problema? Ituturo ko na lang wika. Yun sinasabi ko, duality of the subject area, the language and the content. The content requires literacy skills, the skills to understand, the skills to process information in the subject matter. Kaya lang nga dahil nga sa mother tongue ang kanyang ginagamit at ito ngayon sa English, ang ngayon ang focus ng teacher na lang, madali na maintindihan ng bata if I focus on the English language. It's the idea that the teachers have this premise that when students already have ample learnings of this set skills in the mother tongue, I can now help the skills to the subject matter, science and mathematics. Now, I will focus on helping them understand the language of science, the language of mathematics. Kasi nandun na ang reading skills, literacy skills, research skills, and so on and so forth. Okay? So let's now proceed to question number 2. Let me check my time. Oh my gosh, it's 5 o'clock. Hanggang 5:30 naman tayo. So I still have 30 minutes. Just a second question though. Why is MT important to the teaching and learning process? Okay, let's just have one focus. Because of intellectual development. Research showed that studies have shown that cognitive development as well as intellectual development is comparatively faster in those who are fluent in their mother tongue, whether we like it or not. The first concepts that we learn and how we process the world starts at home. And even research showed that the cognitive processing of every individual starts in the womb of the mother, especially on the second and third trimester, where the child is able now to hear and listen to the two concepts. That will be the sound of the heartbeat of the mother and the voice of the mother. That's why a lot of pediatricians encourage mothers to talk to the child because the child can listen. Hindi nga alam makakapagsalita pa ang bata, pero listening is the first skill developed while we are still inside the womb of the mother. So, ibig sabihin, ang bata nakakarinig na. At nakakarinig ang bata, nakaintindi na rin yan. Okay? So, ibig sabihin, the brain is now also processing those information that they hear from the mother's voice. Natututunan din ng mga bata ang different emotions through the mother's heartbeat. Okay? So on that note, dapat kung anong ginamit na mother tongue ng nanay, yun ang mother tongue ng bata. Okay? So ibig sabihin po that the language of the community, like kunwari sa amin po sa Leyte, waray-waray po ang aming, waray-waray is the tao, waray is the language. Okay? Waray ang aming language. But say, the parents opted to use English at home, then ang mother tongue ng bata, English. Or nasa Cebu po sila, pero ang magulang, they wanted their kids to learn Filipino muna or Tagalog muna, then the child's mother tongue is Tagalog. Kung ano ang kanyang first exposure to the language. And this is what they're going to use to interact with the environment. They will learn how to express their feelings, pagkain, nagugutom na sila sa kanilang mga magulang, hanggang sa basta pagpasok nila ng school, they already have this intellectual development, all of this concept from the environment that they have interacted with from 0 to 4 or 5 years old. And therefore, these concepts are the ones that are easy for students to understand. If the students understood this in the mother tongue, say Cebuano, dapat pagdating sa kinder, Cebuano ang gagamitin to facilitate literacy. Kasi nga kung ang gagamitin agad ay English, ang mga bata will still be focusing on the learning of the language instead of focusing on acquiring literacy skills. Diba? Naintindihan niyo ba ako doon? Kasi paano nila matutunan ng skills if the language, they don't still understand the language. Kung gagamitin natin sa elementary, ay ang wika na alam na ng bata, mas makaka-focus ang bata sa pag-intindi, sa pag-acquire ng skills, kaysa sa learning of the language. Okay, so I hope you understand that. That's intellectual development. And research showed also how the Stanford University came up with this study about the neuroscience of the language acquisition and development. That at the very age from 0 to 8, this is where the child creates lots and lots and lots of synaptic connections with their interaction with adults and their interaction with the environment. And the more interaction they have in the use of the language, the more words that they know, the more concepts that they know, and the more concepts that they know, the higher their processing is and the higher their cognitive processing becomes. And their intellectual ability and their emotional ability gets higher and higher and higher. And that is because if we expose our kids at the very young age in the use of the language. Kaya po, ang mga magulang, sorry po, pupunta rin ako sa mas bata, kausapin ng mga bata. Sabi nila, kasi magiging madaldal ang bata, then that's better. Because the more that they talk, the more that they get used to the language. And the more they get used to the language, the more they process. And the more they process, the more questions they ask. And the more questions they ask, and the more questions is being answered, the more information they understand, and the more processing they get. And it gets it's a cycle. Kung ang bata hindi nagsasalita, hindi kinakausap, hindi sila sagot ng mga magulang. Pagdating sa school, ito yung mga bata na hirap kausapin ng mga teachers. Ayaw magsalita, tinatanong mo na, nakatitig lang sa'yo. It's like staring contest. Hindi mo alam kung naintindihan o hindi kasi hindi sila sanay na kinakausap. Hindi sila sanay na pag nagtanong, sinasagot. Alright? Ito yung sinasabi natin na oral language proficiency on the oracy. Dapat matutunan bata listening and speaking, turn taking. Alright, next, better connection with your culture. We cannot discount the idea that language and culture are rooted together. Language is one of the elements of culture, and therefore words that being used in the language represents the culture. Halimbawa, ang po at opo represents courteous expressions in the in the Philippine culture. Pero sa English wala pong po at opo. So what's the courteous expressions for English? We have please, may. So hindi po natin pwedeng sabihin na ay walang hindi walang galang ang wikang English kasi. Meron siyang counterpart pero hindi equal na po at opo. Another one, Bisaya din, sa Cebuano, walang po at opo sa Cebuano. So, ang tingin ng mga tao sa mga Cebuano, walang modo kasi walang po at opo. Wait, you're using your Tagalog culture, Tagalog language to discriminate or to understand or to critique the Cebuano language. Walang po at opo sila. Mayroon silang mga courteous expression pero hindi lang kapareho ng Tagalog. Why? It represents the language and the culture are one and they represent each other. So, if you want to respect the people of the culture of that people, you should also respect the language. And that's what we need to help our students understand, that the language of math and the language of science is representing the culture of science, the culture of mathematics. And on that point, the language used by the teacher teaching science and the language used by the mathematics teacher cannot be compared cannot be compared to that of the use of the language of the English teacher or Filipino teacher. Nakuha po natin. Minsan sinasabi natin, daming mispronunciation ang math teacher, magaling magturo. Wait, baka we're judging them on mispronunciation. Let's listen to their content. Ngayon, kung may problema sa kanilang mispronunciation, then let's point it out and provide them with trainings in language proficiency, oral language proficiency. Pero kung sa tingin nyo, magaling siya magturo, tama ang kanyang mga tinuturo, tama ang mga konsepto, lahat ay maayos, it's not always about oral proficiency of the language. Okay, duality nga po yan. Diba? Dual, okay, language and content. Next, we have also second language learning. Research showed that our students, when a child reads out in their mother tongue since childhood, he or she would have stronger literary skills in other language. A lot of research showed that students who have been taught to read in their mother tongue learns faster to read in other languages because they have already set skills. All they have to do now is learn the language, and somehow they have a map in their head how to go about it, because it's one way or the other, especially for alphabetic languages, it will be easy for them to transfer those skills. All right, so wag na po natin isipin palagi na English ang importanteng wika. Kasi nga, ang Pilipinas kasi palaging sinasabi na pag magaling mag-English, matalino yan. Hindi. Paano kung pinanganak lang siya na ang mga magulang gustong English? Diba? Paano naman ang mga bata, say from the poorest of the poor, that the parents also have language problem with the English language, but does not necessarily mean that they're stupid, that they don't know anything. Okay? May alam sila, kailangan lang ituro ang wika. Ano lang po kadali. Next, pride. Ito po yung sinasabi ko palagi na it's easy for kids and for students to learn the subject matter if they have high level of confidence and they have self-concept, a high self-concept themselves. And by being comfortable with the idea that their language is also a par with the other languages, it makes them understand na walang mas mataas, walang mas mababa, kundi pantay-pantay lahat ang wika. Dahil ang wika ginagamit sa lahat ng uri ng pakikipagtalastasan. At kung ito ay nagagamit at epektibo sa pakikipagtalastasan at pakikipag-ututang dila, kung ngayon pang gamit po natin, then it is a good language. And it does not mean that that this language or English is always better than the other. All languages should be at equal status because they are used for communication one way or the other. And if kids realize na kahit pala ako Ilonggo, kahit pala ako Igorot, ang wika namin ay basta yung wika nila dun sa Escudolleras, ay tinatanggap ay equally, walang lamangan, walang babaan ng tingin, they will feel good. And since they have now a good self-concept, they have an idea, they, they will also accept other languages na ay tatanggapin ko to kasi tinanggap mo ang wika ko, aaralin ko rin ito. So it's also the idea of acceptance. Since their language has been accepted, then they will also accept the idea. Hindi sa sarado utak nila. Right? But if teachers and parents have this idea that there's a hierarchy of acceptance of languages, ganun din po ang tingin ng mga bata. So kawawa po ang mga, eventually po, it will also lead to bias to other language. And we don't want our kids to grow up and become adults looking down on people with other languages. Kagaya ng, ano ba yan? Principal, hindi pa nga mag-English na maayos. Eh paano naman kung magaling mag-manage ng school? So yung babasehan natin talaga, English talaga. The MTBML in the Philippines is the kind of language policy that we created for the Philippines so that mawala na po ang dahan-dahan po mabago ang paniniwala ng mga Pilipino na hindi English ang pinakamataas. Para pantay-pantay po yan. Hindi rin Filipino ang pinakamataas. O hindi lahat ng wika ay pantay-pantay. At naniniwala po tayo na kung ang bata matuto sa mother tongue nila, then they will have pride in themselves, and then it will also enrich the language, enrich the culture of where the students come from, and they will be proud of where they come from. Last question. All right. What is the role of MT in the teaching and learning process? Okay, this is from the K-12 curriculum, and this is all teachers should know about this. It starts with, of course, MT as a subject area to facilitate orals and literacy in the primary grades, in the early grades. There's a separate subject area so that the teachers can teach students how to read and write, decode in the mother tongue. So hindi pwedeng mother tongue ginagamit lang as a medium instruction, but it has to be taught as a subject matter because that's where the students are taught how to read and write in the language. Inaaral nila ang wika, okay, para magkaroon sila ng literacy skills. Okay. So learners are taught oral language proficiency and literacy in the mother tongue through mother tongue as a subject. So on that note, kailangan talaga na may separate subject matter for the mother tongue. But remember, I would like to tell the teachers out there that we are teaching mother tongue not because we need our students to be good at the language. No, we are teaching them to understand the language so that they can read and write in the language. It's still teaching students the mother tongue for literacy, not just for language sake. Nakalimutan kasi natin, minsan may mga teacher, ang focus ay puro lang language. Nakalimutan na, I'm teaching the mother tongue because it's for literacy and for numeracy and for scientific thinking. All right? So this is what MT as a subject area matter. Hindi yung magaling sila, alam. Ayoko na sabihin, basta yun. Nangyari kasi puro language lang. MT as a primary MOTL. In the primary grades as well, that the subject for students to, since students are now being taught to read and write in the mother tongue. So, ang una munang MOTL na mga subjects like math and science should be in the mother tongue. Only that, there's a principle that the technical language of the subject matter should not be translated. Okay? Kung wala po siyang katumbas at mababago ang kahulugan, wag po nating i-translate kasi mag-iiba po ang kahulugan ng mga salita. So, okay lang pong gamitin mo pag sinabi natin primary MOTL is for students to understand the concepts of the subject matter using the mother tongue. Ang mother tongue po kasi since doon naman sila tinuturuan ng literacy para ang bata makapagbasa at makapagsulat na ang content ay science and mathematics, araling panlipunan. But that's the early grades. Another area, wait lang. So the teacher used the MT as the MOTL to teach concepts of the content area, especially in the lower grades. It's basically from kinder to grade 3. Although we hope it's up to grade 6, but again, it's the decision of the Department of Education. Next is the MT as an auxiliary MOTL. When you say auxiliary, I'm almost out of time. Last two na po ito. MT as an auxiliary MOTL. Mostly we have this in the junior high school up to senior high school. Ano sir ang ibig sabihin ng auxiliary MOTL? Auxiliary means the teacher uses MT or mother tongue to support the primary MOTL of the content area, especially in the high grade levels. There's a possibility that our students still lack proficiency of the target language or the target MOTL or the primary MOTL. In a high school kasi, ang primary MOTL, we have primary MOTL and the auxiliary MOTL. In junior high school, senior high school, the primary MOTL is now English as an MOTL for science, mathematics, MAPE, TLE. Filipino as primary MOTL for, of course, Filipino subject, araling panlipunan at edukasyon sa pagpapakatao. So, it's yun ang primary. Now, there's a possibility that your students' proficiency of the primary MOTL is not yet that high for them to be able to partake, for them to be able to understand the concepts. Therefore, in our policy of the K-12 curriculum, you can code switch to a language like the mother tongue to support the understanding of the content. So ang tawag natin doon ay auxiliary MOTL. Halimbawa, nagtuturo ka ng science tapos English po ang gamit po natin. And then explain ka, tapos all of a sudden your student said, "Sir, anong ibig sabihin nito?" They explain, anong ibig sabihin? And then you realize na you've been explaining a lot and some of your students have not understood it in English. Then you may code switch to Filipino or to mother tongue to use it as an auxiliary. Pag sabi ng auxiliary, para makatulong sa pag-intindi. Dahil kahit paanong gamit ng teacher ng primary MOTL, kung hindi naman naintindihan ng bata, wala rin importante. At the end of the day, what we want you teachers to realize is that language should not be a barrier to learning the content. If English is still a barrier in high school, then code switch to a language of comfortability, of comprehensibility. It could be Filipino, it could be the mother tongue. But it doesn't mean you'll have to stop there. Alam mo may problema mga bata, then you now teacher in the junior high school, senior high school, should be aware that I need to help my students transition their language skills in the mother tongue of Filipino to the target or primary MOTL. Nakuha po natin. Okay? There's no point of being so strict with the use of the primary MOTL if it will only make students stop talking and participating in the class. Take note of that. Next would be the MOTL as a language of assessment. Now, bakit sinabi ko na kailangan mong ibalik ang bata kung nasa junior high school ka, kailangan ibalik ang bata sa paggamit ng primary MOTL. Dahil po, kahit ka gumamit ng explanation mo ay nasa mother tongue or Filipino at hindi man sila tulungan na makaintindi at bumalik sa primary MOTL, pagdating kasi sa assessment, hindi gagamitin ang auxiliary language. Hindi gagamitin ang yung auxiliary language na ginamit mo to support the primary language. Ang gagamitin pa rin po ay yung primary MOTL. Kung ang primary MOTL po ay English, then English po ang language. E paano kung hindi mo tinulungan ang bata na mag-transcend back? So again, I would say that, okay sir, okay ma'am, pwede po kayo gumamit pag-code switch, pero kailangan mo silang ibalik doon. Sir, paano na babalik? You could probably explain it in the mother tongue and then revert back to code switch back to English. Or kung hindi pa rin talagang sobrang baba ng language proficiency ng bata sa primary MOTL, then you could probably provide them with a remedial program on language proficiency on the use of the primary MOTL. That would be Filipino and English. Alas, a lot of schools do not acknowledge the fact that some students or most of the students need intervention, especially for junior high school, intervention on Filipino and English. Nakuha po natin, mag-intervention sa math kasi kailangan ng math skills. Kahit pa anong intervention sa math, anong intervention yung science, sa grammar, kung ang pinaka-problema ng bata talaga ay language and literacy, then yun pong ibibigay nyo na intervention. Kasi kawawa pa rin si teacher nasa junior high school na anong transition na ginawa niya, code switching, kung talagang ang bata ay talagang walang proficiency sa primary MOTL. Alright? So teachers must consistently use the MOTL of the content area, not just in the instructional process, but also in the assessment process. Ibabalik po natin kasi nga kahit anong code switch ang ginawa ng teacher sa instruction at saka sa learning or teaching and learning process, the language of assessment will still be consistently and will always be consistently the primary MOTL. On that note, I will end my session. So I'm now ready to answer questions from you people out there.
Okay, thank you, Brother Ricky. So we proceed po with our question and answer. The first one
Yes,
po is from Mr. Rafi Tano. Sir
Mr. Mr. or Miss?
Rafi, Mr.
Mr. Raff. Uy, may babaeng Raffing pangalan ah.
O, sige po.
Mr. and Miss na lang. Mr. or
Okay
Miss.
po. Sige po. Sir, ask ko lang po kung normal lang po sa isang bata na 2 years old na hindi pa rin nagsasalita. Kasi po mix gamit nilang dialect sa bahay. Ilocano, Ilonggo, Tagalog, at English.
Okay. I would like first, before I answer your question, I would like us to change our perspective of the word dialect. Pag sinabi po natin dialect, ito po ay mga wika, well, dialecto na sa isang wika. Halimbawa, Tagalog as a dialect, Tagalog Cavite, Tagalog Batangas, Tagalog Bulacan, sila po ay under the language Tagalog. They are still comprehensible, pero nag-iba nagkakaroon ng variation, dialect na tawag. Pero hindi na po natin in-encourage yung mga tao na gamitin ang dialect kasi nga is diminutive. Ibig sabihin, mas mababa ang wika na yun. So kung Ilonggo, that's a language. Pag sinabi natin English, it's a language. Well, anyway, that would be probably another topic. So answering your question, so the 2-year-old child is exposed to many languages at home. All right, too many languages to the point that the child can no longer focus on which language. Okay lang po yun, ma'am. 2 years old, ang bata po ay posible po is still on the process of learning and acquiring the language. Because nga walang consistency of exposure of the language, ang bata is still sorting out in his or her brain. So baka ang salita ng bata ay parang Chinese na. Okay, so intindihin nyo po. So what do you do? Kung ikaw kakausapin mo, use just one language. Huwag niyong gayahin ng bata na pag kinausap ng sinabi ng bata, sasabihin mo lahat, ano kayo, mga pabo kayo lahat? So, just kahit ano ang wikang ginamit ng bata, mixing all those languages that he or she exposed to, pagsabihan ang mga tao sa bahay, be consistent with the language. At pag kinausap ang bata, you have the responsibility to try at your utmost understand what the child is trying to say. Kasi kasalanan nyo, hindi naman kayo consistent. Sana kung ginawa nyo, consistent exposure to the language. But again, research showed that the child can learn up to 8 languages at a very young age. Again, only that consistent po ang exposure. Like kung kausap si tatay isang wika. Kausap si nanay, isang wika. Pag and so on and so forth. Hindi yung ang gulo-gulo ng wika ninyo. It doesn't mean that the child has cognitive, academic, or intellectual problem. 2 years old is still what we call as too young for a language delay diagnosis. So ang bata naman nakakapagsalita, kung deaf ba siya, nakaintindi naman siya, siguro lang talaga sobrang dami ng wika. Meron pang wika ng media sa language. So isa pa din, meron ako pamangkin na ganyan. Pero pagdating ng 4 or 5 years old, it sorted out into Filipino and English. The brain has a way of sorting it out. So you just have to wait, okay? And be consistent and be patient with the child. Kausapin pa rin. Thank you.
Thank you po. The next question is from Mr. Prince Dave R. Llaneza. Sir, how can we deal with a class with students who have different mother tongues? For example, in a class, there are students who speak Tagalog and students who speak Iloco.
Sa ganun po, ma'am, kung hindi pwedeng paghiwalayin ang grupo o yung estudyante into 2 groups ng mother tongue like Ilocos, 1 group for Ilocos, 1 group for Tagalog, at pinagsama po sila, siguro at ang gagamitin po natin diyan ay yung ano ang mas naintindihan ng lahat. Halimbawa, kung naintindihan sa estudyante nyo, ang naintindihan ng bata ay Tagalog, and then Tagalog pong gagamitin nyo na mother tongue or MOTL. Pero, kunwari yung mga speakers ng Tagalog, nakaintindihan po ng Ilocos, then Ilocos po yung MOTL na gagamitin po natin. So, kung wala pong commonality, kung wala talagang commonality, walang parehong wikang ginagamit, titignan mo ngayon ang language of comprehensibility, naiintindihan sa listening. Thank you.
Okay, next one po is from Miss Cheryl Pink Limbag. Sir, ano po ang epekto ng bilingualism sa ating educational system?
Well, sa atin po sa Philippines po kasi before the multilingual po natin, we had the bilingual. Very nice of you that you know your history of the language policies and language program in the Philippines. Yes, we came from bilingual policy from Filipino and English because of our constitution. It's stated there that we have Filipino and English as the language of the society of the Philippines, but it also mentioned the Constitution and all other languages, supporting also the growth and development of all other languages in the Philippines as the Constitution din yun. So hindi ang Constitution lang MTBMLE. Only that, dapat, well, the problem, yung mga tanong ninyo, puro ang kalalabasan talaga ay problema. Well, the point of what we're trying to do with the MTB bilingual education is that the idea that the more languages you understand and the more languages you acquire, the more intellectual you become. Because again, as I mentioned, language with it would be culture. And the more language you're exposed to, the more language that you get to know, the more cultures you understand. And the more cultures you understand, the more open you become, the more intellectual you become, the more open-minded you become, because you become you become a person open to other differences. The idea of bilingual education also promotes that that students can also transition their skills from one language to another. And that by being able to transition from one language to another, the idea of being able to adjust to the demands of a particular society or demands of a particular subject area helps students to realize that they need really to understand the language so that they can cope with those demands. So far, so good. Maganda naman po ang results ng ako. I'm a product of bilingual education in the Philippines, Filipino and English. Meron pa kami nung panahon namin na talagang nagkwento na ako. Sa panahon namin, it's either Filipino strand ka or English strand. I chose, of course, the English strand. The Filipino was so difficult for me. Anyway, ngayon kasi it's not bilingual anymore. It's multilingual because we have considered the mother tongue. In the bilingual program before po, we did not consider the mother tongue of the Philippines or the mother tongue of the child. But then again, the challenge for transitioning our language program from bilingual to multilingual is huge, that we need lots of teachers trained to use the mother tongue, lots of funding for material staff development, and also kagaya in connection to the question number 1, instrument that would help us identify ano ba talaga ang mother tongue ng mga bata talaga. Kasi mga bata, maaaring Inglesero yan, pero ang kanyang mother tongue pala ay iba. That's a possibility. So we need those instruments for us to really identify ano ba talaga kung ang research show talaga na mother tongue really has an effect on the learning of the acquisition and learning of other languages, then we have to be thorough with our materials, thorough with our identification of the mother tongue of our child. Otherwise, pag hindi natin inayos yun, mas lalo lang, we're doing more harm than good to our students. Kasi nangyayari, mas familiar na pala sila sa Tagalog, mas familiar na pala sila sa Filipino, mas familiar na pala sila sa English, tapos pinilit pa natin na mag-aral sa mother tongue, lalo natin silang pinahirapan. Kasi there's a possibility ng bata nasa Ilocos, pero English po mother tongue. There's a possibility na ang bata po ay nasa Benguet, pero Tagalog or Filipino ang kanilang first language, pero Tagalog po yun, or Tagalog po ang kanilang first language, or English. Or it could be other language. It could be like French. Kung ang tatay ay mga foreigner, the parents would choose other languages as their first language. We need specific identification of the mother tongue of our students if we truly want to really be multilingual, follow the principles of MTB MLE and transition that to MOTL. Otherwise, there's no point of discussing primary MOTL, auxiliary MOTL, when all of this would just disrupt and make our students more confused than they already are. Pero I hope you understand what I'm trying to say. Mitch, natulog ka ni. Mitch? Nag-ilaw ako. Kita ka ba ako? Am I still there? I don't know if I'm still connected or not. Um, no one is already. I think that will be the third question already. So let me continue on to my challenge to you guys out there. So here's my challenge to you. I will start with, as I've always mentioned, I've mentioned that this October up to November, I'll be now including verbal Bible verses that explain everything that we're discussing about this. Everything is in the Bible. All right. I would like to mention the verse from Isaiah chapter 5, verse 4 that says that the Lord God has given me the tongue of those who are taught, that I may know how to sustain with the word him who is weary. Morning by morning he awakens. He awakens my ear to hear as those who are taught. So dito pa lang sa Bible sinasabi natin the importance of language and the importance of words and helping people learn the language, because we will not understand each other if we do not understand our language. Our goal is not to have a universal language. Okay, for me, this is my personal thought. There is no point of having one universal language or just one language for the whole world. What we need is acceptance, understanding, and being able to accept the idea and be open-minded with the idea that we are diverse in terms of culture and language, and these are all creations of God, and therefore if these are all coming from God, we need to respect it as such. And therefore, just because they have a different language, a different culture, doesn't mean they are a different person. They are still people. They are still created. They're still human beings. They are still creation of God, and we have to accept that. Just because they have a different language doesn't mean they are lesser than us. Okay? So here's my challenge to you though. Teachers and students use spoken and written language to communicate with each other, present tasks, engage in learning process, present academic content, assess learning, display knowledge and scale, and build classroom life. Therefore, meaning that if students do not understand us, it's not because they do not understand the content, it's that they do not understand the language of the content. In addition, much of what students learn is language. So if our students are really good, have acquired certain levels of proficiency of the language, they can use the skills, this cognitive intellectual skills in using the language to understand the content. So again, this is my final challenge to you. The challenge is teaching both the language and the content. We have been trained to teach the content. In college, we've been trained to think of strategies, to think of approaches, to make the content comprehensible. And here's my challenge to you. Add the add language. Teach students to understand the language and the content of your subject matter. With that, thank you very much. Again, I apologize for eating a lot of your time. I extended 8 minutes, so at 5:30, I think 8 minutes okay. I'm getting there. I'm getting there. I'm trying my best to stop talking so much, but that's telling me not to breathe air. I'm a talker. I'm a very talkative person, and I like to talk and converse with you people out there. And I love so much talking with you. And once this pandemic's done, I would love to see you in person, have one conference with you all. I like for Vibal. But since our situation is not yet improving, so let's still be contented with webinars here. I hope to see you again tomorrow. And next week will be our domain 2 for the PPST. So all teachers who are tuning in this week, we are going to continue on to domain 2 by next week. Thank you very much and have a good afternoon. Oh, I think it's afternoon still. Afternoon to all of you. Am I still connected? Thank you very much.